All right. Um, evening. And you can go ahead and unmute because I mean we're a very small group. You're well behaved, and it takes more time to unmute if you have something that you want to say or ask. So I think it's okay. Unless you don't want to. Oh, there you go, Joe. Great.
There we go.
All right. So this poem is called Tourist. And actually, I heard him read it in Hebrew shortly after it was published. I'm not sure. I guess, I don't think he read it to our class. I think he must have done a reading at our school as well, but I distinctly remember hearing him read it. Again, I'll read it in English and then we can discuss it. So the poem is called Tourist. Visits of condolence is all we get from them. They squat at the Holocaust Memorial. They put on grave faces at the Wailing Wall, and they laugh behind heavy curtains in their hotels. They have their pictures taken together with our famous dead at Rachel's tomb and Herzl's tomb and on Ammunition Hill. They weep over our sweet boys and lust after our tough girls and hang up their underwear to dry quickly in cool blue bathrooms. Once I sat on the steps by a gate at David's Tower. I placed my two heavy baskets at my side. A group of tourists was standing around their guide, and I became their target. You see that man with the basket? Just right of his head, there's an arch from the Roman period. Just right of his head. But he's moving, he's moving. I said to myself, redemption will come only if their guide tells them, you see that arch from the Roman period, it's not important. But next to it, left and down a bit, there sits a man who's brought fruit and vegetables for his family. I mean, I find this a delightful poem. And I have thoughts, but before I say what I want to say, I want to hear what you all have to say or
I
add.
think that he feels that people who come to tour and don't really understand what they're seeing are half thinking about what they're going to have for dinner and half listening to the tour guide, and it's not as meaningful for them if they haven't prepared to see some of these important sites.
Yeah. But I think I mean, all of that is true. I mean, I think that there's more than that in a way. Joe?
Well, similar to what Toby said, it shows like for sort of the frivolity of tourists or some tourists. I'm trying to reconcile the first group and the second group of verses.
Right. It almost seems like two different poems.
Yeah.
Right. And it's actually often published as two different poems, but it appears originally as one poem. All right, let me share with you just a couple of thoughts. All right. One is if you look at, okay, they have their pictures taken together with our famous dead at Rachel's tomb and Herzl's tomb. Okay, now, what do you notice about that coupling? I mean, Rachel's tomb is ancient, ancient,
Yeah.
ancient, right? I mean, whether it's really Rachel's tomb or not, whatever, we won't go into it, right? But, Rachel was a long time ago, right? Like
Mhm.
3,500 years ago. And Herzl died 120 years ago, right?
Mhm.
So, Rachel's tomb or Rachel herself, right? Because together with our famous dead, right? So Rachel is from 3,500 years ago, right? And Herzl is not exactly contemporary. I mean, I suppose at this point there's nobody still alive who was alive when Herzl was alive, but all of us at some point in our lives knew people who actually were, contemporaries of Herzl, right? Even if they were babies when Herzl, died, but whatever. But they were a lot, my grandparents, right? Um,
Do- Think
Oh,
he froze, I think. I think
you're
his screen.
you're muted.
I think his screen froze. There we go.
Yeah.
yeah, my screen froze. I don't know what happened, and it cut me off. Now I'm back.
Okay.
All right. What do you all know about Herzl's tomb? I mean, where is it?
Isn't isn't it Mount Herzl?
Mount Herzl, right? Har Herzl, Mount Herzl, right?
Mhm.
Obviously, that's not the biblical name of it, right? But what else is at Mount Herzl besides Herzl's tomb? Right? It's the Arlington Cemetery of Israel,
Mm.
Yeah.
right? I mean, Rabin is buried there. I think Gold Meir is buried there. Jabotinsky is buried there, although there was a whole big controversy about that, and his grave wasn't actually moved to Mount Herzl until Begin was prime minister, right? So it's very, very modern. I mean, I just noticed that I don't think that he picked two tombs kind of at random, right? Because like Maimonides' tomb in Tiberias, right? There are other famous tombs, but that represents kind of the whole like sweep of
Mhm.
the Jewish presence in the land of Israel. Okay, and Ammunition Hill is where there was a major battle of the Six-Day War.
Mm.
Okay, now the next couple, right? They weep over our sweet boys and lust after our tough girl,
Alright.
right? I mean, that's kind of an inversion of the normal way you would think of things, too, right? Right? Sweet boys and tough girls,
Mhm.
right? I mean, and I mean, the tough girls thing, especially that, I think, is a Jewish stereotype of Israel, right? I mean, diaspora Jews, diaspora Jewish men, are reputed to lust after girl soldiers, right? I mean, so I find that an interesting kind of inversion too. But I do think that, yeah, there's kind of, I don't know if there's contempt exactly for tourists in this poem. Contempt may be too strong a word, but there's certainly a certain sort of mockery, I think, at the habits of tourists, right? All right. What about
Especially their hanging up their underwear in the blue bedrooms,
blue
bathrooms.
bathrooms, right? Right. I mean, I mean that's the reality, though. I mean, if you go to Israel for more than a few days, you're gonna wind up doing laundry in your bathroom most likely, right? I mean, um, I don't remember if my hotel bathrooms have been blue or not, but um, but hanging up there on. What about the second stanza?
It seems like he wants people to recognize the day-to-day lives of the Israelis themselves when he says that it's more important to to see that this man bought food for his family.
Yeah.
Right, right. I mean, I think that is exactly right. That and I mean, I often say, and I mean, Joe, I remember that we had a conversation about your itinerary in it. I mean, I don't remember exactly, it was a while ago,
Mhm.
but I often say, and I probably said something to you as well, that it's important not just to get like the ancient historical site, right?
Right.
But a sense of Israel as like, not just Jewish Disneyland,
Right.
but as an actual living, breathing country, right? Which, Toby, because of your extended family, your husband's family there, presume you've had that experience, right? But
Right.
most tourists, whether Jewish or not Jewish, don't have that
Mm.
experience of like, contemporary Israel living, breathing society, right? It's the like I call it the Jewish Disney, right? And um, but redemption will only come. Right, you see that arch from the Roman period, it's not important, but next to it, left and down a bit, there sits a man who's brought fruit and vegetables for his family, right? It's the quotidian, the everydayness, the normalness of Israel, right? And, now having said that, redemption will only come, right? I mean, so I mean, I have to say, like, the more I reread this poem, um, the richer it is. I mean, I feel like I'm almost like an archaeologist, like digging into this poem and unearthing levels, right? Because redemption will come only if their guide tells them, you see that arch from the Roman period is not important, but next to it, left and down a bit, there sits a man who's brought fruit and vegetables for his family. Okay. Um,
But I think it's interesting to drop a weighty topic like redemption in the middle of this sarcasm about tourists,
Right. I
they can't
mean,
get much, they can't get more important than redemption.
right. I mean, he's playing on certain rabbinic texts,
Yeah.
right? That redemption will come, you know, redemption will come when all the Jews in the world fully observe 2 Shabbats in a week. The rabbinic saying, okay? Hamevi davar b'shem omro mevi geulalo. That if you quote somebody by name, right? In other words, if you're quoting, and it's not your idea, you correctly attribute it to the original person who said it, you bring redemption, right? There are all kinds of stories about how you bring redemption. Okay, so I mean, I think he's playing on that rabbinic trope, right? But a couple of things. One is that it's interesting to me that the particular archaeological site he's talking about, right, is from the Roman period, right? It's a Roman arch. It's not that, it's David's Tower. Okay, David's Tower, which actually wasn't actually built by David. I mean, there's a lot of, different levels to it, and I'm not an expert in archaeology. But I think it's pretty clear it wasn't built by David. It was most of it was probably built by Herod. Okay, but it's the arch from the Romans. But also redemption will come, right? And the poems we looked at last week, right, are Amichai, whether it's anger at God or absence of God, right, is clearly like rebelling against classic Jewish Orthodox, right? So here redemption will come when people don't care about the archaeological sites, they care about the guy who brought fruit and vegetables for his family. Okay, now, right, question. When Zionism started, right, what was the attitude of Orthodoxy towards Zion?
Negative.
Negative, right?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, as you talked before, because they are counting on God to resurrect Israel, not a political system, not through politics.
Right, exactly. Right, that it's basically chutzpah, right? Like if you're a teenager and you tell your kid you're grounded, right? The kid's enough grounded. Right? No, the kid doesn't get to decide that. How long that styles. I mean, we were watching, I went to the rally for Israel on Tuesday. And Kelly and I were watching some news coverage of it afterwards. The only sort of visible demonstration or counter demonstration at the rally was by a group called Neturei Karta. Okay, I don't know if you know who Neturei Karta are anti-Zionist Hasidic Jews who show up at Palestinian demonstrations all the time in full Hasidic regalia with signs. They're usually wearing like the Hasidic regalia and a keffiyeh around there as a scarf. Okay. Authentic Jews reject Zion. And Kelly asked me, what's their deal? Right? Why are they? And I explained it's because precisely that they think that Zionism was rebellion against God, right? But here, redemption will come from the ordinary day-to-dayness, right, of a guy buying fruits and vegetables for his family, right? And the fact of the matter is that most Israelis, either they themselves or their parents or grandparents came to Israel, right, not out of ideological fervor, right, but because they needed somewhere to go and it was the only place they could go, right? I mean, Amichai born in Germany in 24, right? His family makes Aliyah in 35, right? Was it because suddenly they were filled with Zionist fervor?
Yeah.
Right? They had to flee. I mean, they probably were Zionists because he grew up speaking Hebrew as well as German. No, but still, for the most part, I mean, look, Americans who made Aliyah did it out of ideology, right? And like I had some cousins in Israel who came to came from Lithuania. Well, we say Lithuania. I looked up the village where my grandfather was born. It's actually now in Belarus, but we think, right? I mean, the borders are always right, but so some of them went to America, and some of them went to Israel, and some of them stayed behind, and most of the ones who stayed behind got killed. Right? The ones who went to America, right, so that's my family, and the ones who went to Israel. If you went to Israel in the 20s from Lithuania, it's because you were ideological, because you could have gone to America instead, right? But for most people who went to Israel, it wasn't because of the history there. It was because you could, right? And it was to buy fruits and vegetables for their family, right? And the recognition of that day to dayness as what brings redemption to me is an important statement. It's an important statement that that I happen to agree with. I mean, Joe, as you well know, based on our discussions about your itinerary, right? But to me, if you go to Israel and all you see are the arches, you haven't really seen Israel.
Right. Well, I have more time to think about my itinerary now because our trip was canceled today. So,
Is this a trip that you're planning to take?
yes, we were going to go in June.
Oh,
It was canceled today. So,
Oh, well, all right. So I'll consult with you on your itinerary.
right. Be continued.
Yeah. All right. Anything else on this particular point? All right. All right. Like I said, I heard Amichai read it shortly after the poem was published. So that would have been the 81, 82 academic year. But even if I hadn't said that, if I asked you when this poem was written, again, if you pay close attention and you know enough the geography of Jerusalem and you know the history, you would say it has to be after 67, right? Has to be after 67. Why?
oh,
Well, the Wailing Wall was accessible after 67. Right?
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
He's sitting by on the steps by a gate at David's Tower. Okay, and anybody who knows Jerusalem at all knows exactly where this is. right? If you go in the Jaffa Gate, right? If you go in the Jaffa Gate and you've just got in the gate and you're looking straight ahead to the shuk, which goes down, right? And there's a big plaza there, and there's a taxi stand, and off to the right is David's Tower, and there's a low wall that you can actually sit on, right? So he says this, and I know exactly where I see it in my mind, right? But if you're an Israeli, you're not sitting there before 1967, right? So it has to be, and Ammunition Hill also, right? So it has to be sometime after the 6 Day War. The next poem, unless there's anybody has anything else they want to say or ask about previous. Let's go on. So this poem is just called Jerusalem. On a roof in the old city, laundry hanging in the late afternoon sunlight, the white sheet of a woman who is my enemy, the towel of a man who is my enemy, to wipe off the sweat of his brow. In the sky of the old city, a kite. At the other end of the string, a child I can't see because of the wall. We have put up many flags. They have put up many flags to make us think that they're happy, to make them think that we're happy.
I, I think it's just the effort of the Jews and the Arab population to try to live in the same area. And
Yeah, go on. I'm sorry.
and they see how each other they're close enough to see how the other people live. And when it says many flags, I'm assuming there's only, say, one flag to represent each population, but many of them.
Right. 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 And I mean, I happen to, because I looked it up. This is from Amichai's first book of poetry, which was published in 1955. Okay, but even if you didn't know, I mean, it's pretty obvious that this was written before the 6 Day War, right? Because, I mean, you know, you can see the laundry, right? And you can see the kite, but you can't see the kid who's flying the kite. You know he's there because there's a kite in the air, right? And the kite is not going to be in the air unless there's somebody that, I mean, does Amichai know for a fact it's a kid? Not necessarily, but you know, generally who flies a kite? A kid, right? And I can't see the kid because of the wall. Now, heck, I mean, the wall is still there, right? The wall is still there. So it could be a situation even post 67 that you know, if you're living in West Jerusalem in the new city, as Amichai did, you know, but still, I mean, that wall, I mean, the wall is physical, but it's also metaphorical, right? And any other thoughts?
Well, as with the previous poem, it kind of depicts day-to-day life, sort of normal existence.
Right, the everydayness, right?
Everything is right.
Right, that there's laundry hanging, right? The laundry is hanging. It's a sheet. It's a towel that the man uses to wipe off the sweat of his brow. And they're his enemy, right? They're his enemy. Why are they his enemy? I mean, are they really his enemy? I mean, do you get, I mean, I guess the question is, what feeling do you get from that stanza, right? The white sheet of a woman who is my enemy, the towel of a man who is my enemy to wipe off the sweat of his brow. I mean, does Amichai really consider them as enemies?
I think that he paints a picture of an ass, and he's asking, why can't they just get along and be friends? I think that that's when you're that close to each other. But I was wondering, Rabbi Aaron, did you ever know any Israelis who try and Palestinians who really tried to outwardly get along with each other and
Oh, yeah,
build relationships?
I mean, there's look in the everyday, what I call the day to dayness. There was a lot of that, right?
Yeah,
I
right.
mean, I mean, for example, um, when I spent my junior year of college at the Hebrew University, and unlike Tel Aviv University, which puts foreign students in a different dorm than Israeli students, the Hebrew University has American students, all foreign students and Israeli students living in the same dorm. Not in the same dorm, but the same floor. Okay. And there are a reasonable percentage of the Israeli students are Arab citizens of Israel, right? I mean, back then the term was Israeli Arab, right? Now they tend to prefer the term Palestinian citizens, okay? But there was one guy, I mean, they were roommates, but one guy in particular living on my floor with whom I became very friendly. Um, and, and if you looked at us, we could have been brothers. I mean, we resembled each other a lot, and if we had said, "Oh, we're cousins" or whatever, nobody would have doubted. And he became a prominent Palestinian lawyer. Um, and I haven't been in touch with him in a long time, but I used to stay in touch with him, even after I finished going. And when I was writing my master's thesis, um, I wrote my master's thesis on an organization called Hashomer Tzair. Hashomer Tzair is a labor Zionist youth. Okay, I mean it used to actually be, it was an interesting combination. It was a Marxist Zionist, okay, which today sounds absurd, right? But they were Marxist and Zionist. And their archive, the World Archives of Hashomer Tzair are at a place called Givat Haviva, which was originally a college of the kibbutz movement, but now it is mostly a center dedicated to Jewish Arab cooperation within Israel. Okay, that it's So there's an Arabic ulpan for Jewish Israelis. There's a Hebrew ulpan for Palestinian citizens of Israel. A lot of programs on shared society. And yeah, on a day-to-day level, absolutely. There's a lot of, friendship. On a political level, it becomes more complicated,
Yeah.
right? But if you look at surveys that have been done since October 7th, interestingly enough, Palestinian citizens of Israel are starting to feel more Israeli
Mm.
rather than less Israeli. And there was some worry, will there be, will the Palestinian citizens of Israel rise up and so on? It's not happened. If anything, quite the opposite. That's a digression, but I mean, the way I read that first paragraph, um, I don't think Amichai sees these people as his enemy, right? I mean, the situation has created enmity, right? But he's writing about their everydayness, just as in the previous poem. Now, I mean, obviously we flipped the chronology, but he wrote about his own everyday. Yeah, Joe.
No, nothing.
Okay. And we have put up many flags. They have put up many flags to make us think that they're happy, to make them think that we're happy, right? That is anybody happy in this poem?
I don't think
No,
so.
No.
right? They're not happy, right? And the situation has created a certain reality, right? Um, but Amichai, look, I want to say this. I mean, and this is gonna, I mean, but look, I don't need to hide anything from you, right? I mean, my politics vis-a-vis Israel, I mean, I am a firm supporter of Israel, right? I mean, you can see the flag behind me, you can see the shirt I'm wearing. But within the Israeli context, my politics are way on the left, right? I have no use for Benjamin Netanyahu. I have no use for his allies. I have no use for what he stands for, right? Because I think that what he stands for hurts Israel. But most Israeli, creative artists, poets, musicians, writers, authors, novelists, movie directors are people of the left, right? I mean, the Israeli right is completely lacking in any cultural or artistic creativity. I mean, not that Amichai was, I mean, as compared to, let's say, Amos Oz, who was one of the leaders of Peace Now, or David Grossman, who is, well-known man of the left, or Aleph Bet Yehoshua, right? I mean, Amichai was not really known as particularly political in that same way, but his sympathies were more, towards the left than towards the right. And you see, a lot of his poetry, because of the everydayness of it, right? Talks about the everydayness not only of Jews but of Arabs, right? And you know, I think to him the enemy is not the people on the other side of the wall. And the enemy, in a way, is really the wall itself, right?
Mhm.
It's the situation that creates enemies of people who are just trying to live their life.
Mhm.
I think he has some bit of optimism there. I mean, the symbolism of a kite, connecting.
sure.
And the first stanza is more artificial. He lives there and they may be right next door to him. But it's all artificial, as are the flags are artificial. But I think the middle section is more of that glimmer of optimism he has now and then.
Because of the
World.
symbolism of the kite.
Right.
All right, you want to say more about that?
No.
I mean, could again, I'm not a scholar of literature by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, I know that it's like, here, right, there was this Iranian book, I think it was The Kite Runner.
Right, yeah. Mhm.
Mhm.
I'd never read it. I own it, but I haven't read it.
Good dog.
So somebody tell me about
It was depressing.
it. Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
I don't know. I actually read it a few years ago,
Uh-huh.
so I'm not going to be able to give you a nice, smooth summary.
All right.
Well, I think the fact that it's even a child, a child, the mention of a child is hope,
Optimism.
optimism and hope. So,
All right. I'll buy that. This is also a well-known poem of his, of Three or Four in the Room. Out of three or four in the room, one is always standing at the window, forced to see the injustice amongst the thorns, the fires on the hills. And people who left whole are brought home in the evening like small change. Out of three or four in the room, one is always standing at the window, hair dark above his thought. Behind him, the words wandering without luggage, hearts without provisions, prophecies without water, big stones put there standing, closed like letters with no addresses and no one to receive them.
I'd like to know what the injustice amongst the thorns is. Is-
I mean, I don't know. I mean, the only symbol, the only sort of like biblical symbolism that I can think of about the thorns is in the Song of Songs. My love is like a lily amongst the thorns, right? So I think there's probably a play on this. But I don't know. I mean, your guess is as good as mine, right? I mean, certainly if you ask Amichai, right, is the world just? Right, he would have said no. I mean, we read all the poems last week protesting against, the absence or the indifference or the unfairness of God, right? And even in this, right, people who left whole are brought home in the evening like small change, right? And it's, I mean, last week, the Rabbinical Assembly had a discussion for rabbis in the diaspora to hear from two of our colleagues in Israel about the current situation. And one of the rabbis, a female rabbi, she's a part of the Chevra Kadisha, where she, okay, the Chevra Kadisha is the burial society. But the job of the Chevra Kadisha is to prepare people for burial. And one thing that she mentioned, of which I was not aware, but as a Kohen, I can't have any involvement with the Chevra Kadisha, so there's no real reason that I should be aware. But if you die of Kiddush Hashem, that is to say, if you die as a martyr, which basically means, you're killed because you're a Jew, you don't need tahara. Okay, tahara is when the Chevra Kadisha, tahara means purification, when they wash the body to purify the body, because your manner of death makes you pure. Okay, you don't undergo tahara. But she was describing her own experience that she was not preparing bodies for burial. She was preparing parts of bodies for burial. Okay, that people who were killed on October 7th, who, by the way, many of them are still not buried because they haven't been identified. Right? They're right, but it's one thing to read about it. It's another thing to talk to somebody who is actually preparing dismembered bodies for burial. You have to excuse me for a second. And people who left whole are brought home in the evening like small change. Right? And this is still happening. This is still the Israeli experience. It's also the Palestinian experience in Gaza. I don't, deny that. And that's injustice, right? And it doesn't mean that one side or the other is to blame, right? It's really the situation that is to blame, right? But, out of 3 or 4 in the room, one is always standing at the window, forced to see the injustice among the thorns. And most people can just live their lives, right? But there's always that one person who can't just live their lives, right? They have to stand at the window and look out, and I can see that person in my mind, though. Right? And the hair dark above his, to me, that one person is Amichai himself, right? Obviously, right? That kind of a buzz, right? But and it's interesting because again, there's so many. Like, I feel like I'm a archaeologist of poems, right? Because Amichai is writing about the everyday, right? But he's also writing about not being able to just enjoy life, right? Because he's standing at the window brooding over all of the terrible injustice.
I can certainly see this poem applying today,
Yeah.
to what
Sure.
people are going through.
Right. I mean, the fact of the matter is, I mean, I don't suspect there's a lot of everyday going on in Israel.
Mm.
I mean, although, like, I mean, I have a cousin who is one of Israel's top jazz musicians, right? He plays the flute, and he's a very well-known jazz musician, not just in Israel, but on the world jazz. His name is Matan Plum. He's a cousin of mine. And, he's doing concerts, right? But the concerts are to raise money to rebuild the kibbutzim
Mm.
in the South that were destroyed, right? Or to raise money for people who have been internally displaced, because there's something like 250,000 Israelis who can't go home. They live either, right next to Gaza or right next to the Lebanese border, and they can't go home. So is he playing jazz? Yeah, he's playing jazz, right? But it's not,
Mm.
it's to raise money for, these causes. Um,
It,
right.
I wonder in the poem what the other people who aren't looking out the window are doing.
Yeah, I don't know. What are they?
Maybe they're trying to keep things normal.
Yeah, I mean, I see this like 3 or 4 in the room. I mean, I see like a cocktail party, or a small gathering of friends, right? And they're just whatever, and this guy is standing at the window, right? Rooted. Um, right, but the words wandering without luggage. I mean, again, I don't profess to really necessarily understand this, but um hearts without provisions, prophecies without water, big stones put there, standing closed like letters with no addresses and no one to receive them. Right? I mean, to me, the metaphor of words sort of wandering around, I don't know. I confess I don't really know what any of this means, right? But if we were to ask, Tommy, I know what does it mean that way? And I'm not going to go on to the next poem because I mean, it's long, and we don't have in 6 minutes time to really do it. So I'll wrap up now. Obviously, next week is Thanksgiving, um, so no class. I think the week after I'll continue with this unless something happens and it seems like necessary to talk about something else today. All
Rabbi
right.
Area,
Yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you so
yeah.
much.
I was just wondering if you could make a few comments about how it was to be in DC during the demonstration.
Um, yeah, sure. I mean, I have to say, I mean, war can often bring out like the worst in people, right? But mean, the first thing that was striking, obviously, it wasn't an entirely Jewish crowd, but it was a mostly Jewish, right? And just the incredible diversity,
Mm.
right? I mean, the obvious diversity in terms of like religious approach as indicated by the way people dress, right? And there were, I mean, not Hasidim other than the Neturei Kartas, right? They're not, because Hasidim by and large, I mean, most Hasidim are not anti-Zionist like Neturei Karta, but they're not Zionist either. But there were a lot of not only modern Orthodox, but what's known as like yeshivish Orthodox, okay, who are not Hasidic, but wear black hats and black, um, you know, but also like, people carrying gay pride flags with Star of David on them, and people carrying, signs, pro-Israel, pro-democracy, pro-peace, right? So there was a strong political diversity, and um, which I think was smart, right? Because first, because you wanted to get as many people there as possible, right? Because the big story, I mean, the big story was not the content of anything that was said so much as just the numbers there,
Right.
right? And so, I mean, I read news stories leading up to it. I mean, it was sponsored by the Jewish Federations of North America and the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. No co-sponsor, no co-sponsors, so that you didn't run into the situation of saying, well, I can't co-sponsor if they're co, right? No co-sponsors, no organizational representatives. I mean, people were saying to me afterwards, there was a minister who gave a speech, but no rabbi, right?
Mm.
And I mean, I have to say, the one speaker that I was not happy about was that Minister John Hayes. Okay, because I don't want to say anything about it, but I was not happy that he was on the program, right? But why that minister and no rabbi, right? Because I mean, this, right? If you can't, the minute you have a rabbi, then you have to have at least four rabbis, right? Because you can't have, right? You can't have a rabbi of one denomination and not the other three, right? And and if you have, a woman rabbi, then the Orthodox will be upset, right? And if you don't have a woman rabbi, then everybody else will be upset. So no rabbi, right? Um, all of which, by the way, I agree with. I mean, I do. I mean, I think it was smart to get, everybody participating in that. Um, and what was interesting, people wrote afterwards, and I think it's true, is that you don't expect something like this to be festive, but it actually was festive, right? Because like it felt nice. I mean, for the same reason why more people have been coming to shul lately, right? Because we feel lonely and we want to be in a place where we don't have to explain ourselves, right? Where we don't have to explain or justify. And, the fact that we could be there all together without having to explain, without having to justify, without being afraid, right? And knowing that the police were there to protect us and not to kill us, you know. And so it was kind of like, I don't know, like a juice almost. Um, I'm very glad I went. You know, I mean, it's also, you know, in that sense, it's kind of a privilege to live where we do. I mean, when people, I mean, they're chartering planes from all over.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
you know,
I
so
lost your picture.
oh, all right. Can you see me now?
No, no, it's, I have to get, let's see,
Oh, okay.
I have to re-enter.
Um, so yeah,
Okay,
it was a good day.
okay. So
All
I'm
right,
glad
thank you.
everything went smoothly,
Yeah, so am I.
safely.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Good.
I mean, it didn't go smoothly because it was supposed to end at 3, and I think it ended at like 4:30. I mean,
Well, then it
I
was a Jewish event.
I know, but they promised that. Look, I didn't care. I mean, I left at 2:30 anyway because I didn't want to deal with the crowds on the
The
metro.
crowd, yeah.
You know, but if you flew and
Oh, that's true.
I you're right, but I mean, you also know that I'm just not that way, right? I think if something is supposed to start at, you know, 9:30, it starts at 9:30 and not 9:35, not 9:40, but like I said, I'm a Litvak with the soul of a Yek. And, you know, anyway, good night, folks.
Okay,
Right.
good night. Thanks, Lila Tov.
Bye,